Alright guys, what's up? So it's been a minute since I've done a video. I've been meaning to do more videos, I've just been busy. So we're going to try to make up for lost time today. I figured I would walk you guys through my amplifier collection, which has recently grown a little bit. My guitar collection got a little out of hand, so I ended up selling off about 10 guitars and took that money and bought some more amps. So let's get into it. Alright, we'll kick it off with this. This is the Silvano SLO 100. Classic hard rock and metal amp. I'm sure you guys know all about these. This is a 2020 model. It's all stock. It's got soft tech tubes. Not much to say about that one. This is one of those amps that I've had like 3 or 4 of these. I keep buying them and then I sell them and then I regret selling them, so I buy them back again. But yeah, it's here for the time being. All right, moving right along, we've got a PV5152, and as you can see, this one says Ted Nugent on it. So this was Ted Nugent's amp. He sold off, I can't remember, it was about a dozen or so amps on Reverb last month, and I picked this one up. This one is a little different from some of the other ones he sold. I noticed they were pretty beat up and had like, you know, markings and basically tour settings. You know, you could tell he played with them live. I don't think this one was played live. I think this was probably one of his studio or maybe just personal use ones. But I was blown away by this amp. I really bought it just as an investment, but I think I'm going to end up keeping it because it sounds so damn good. It's I've always liked the 5150s. You know, I've had a bunch of the scripts and block letters, and I've had the 6505s and whatnot. This one is pretty much like those, but a little bit tighter sounding, maybe a little bit more gain. And as far as I know, he didn't modify it or anything. I think it's bone stock. Coming around the back side here, you can see new tubes in 2003. Isn't that great? So yeah, these are the quote-unquote new tubes. They're GT groove tubes, 6L6s, and then it came with 12AX7s that were GT brand as well. I did swap those out. I do a lot of tube rolling, so I spent a little bit of time and really dialed it in, but these power tubes actually sounded great, so I didn't want to change that. So that's it for the Nuge. Over here we've got something kind of interesting. Another Silvano, except it's not a Silvano. This is a clone. I don't usually buy clones. I don't usually buy quote-unquote fake amps, but this one I got in a trade and it really surprised me. If I'm being honest with myself, I like it better than the actual SLO 100. This one is an SLO 100 clone, but it's had some mods done to it, so it is a little bit warmer sounding. It's a little bit higher gain. And so for my style of playing, this one actually kind of fits better than the actual SLO 100. It's also only 50 watts, so I can crank it up in here a little bit more than I can this one. Plus, I mean, who doesn't like snakeskin, right? Matches the cab. So like I said, it's a clone, and it was built by Britt Tone, who's based in Alabama. And yeah, I did a bunch of tube rolling on it too and really got it dialed in. But it's, as you can see, it's pretty much the same controls and everything as a real Silvano. So that brings us to the Diesel VH4. This is one of my favorite amps. This is, I always joke, if I was stranded on a deserted island and I could only have one amp, this is the one. It's got 4 channels that are all very good. To be honest with you, like most people, I only use channel 3. So there's the settings I use for that. That's my settings over here. This was one of those amps, you know, growing up I listened to Metallica a lot, James Hetfield. I knew he used these, and so as soon as I had the means, I bought one, and it's one of the few things in life that I really had built up in my head that actually lived up to the expectations. And it's funny because I've heard other reviewers and YouTube guys saying the opposite. You know, it was a letdown. I thought it was going to be great, and it just wasn't what I thought it would be. And of course, everybody's ears are different, but I think one thing that a lot of people miss with this amp is that number one, you got to EQ it right. So these are some pretty good settings, at least to my ears. But the main thing with these is you got to crank them. So like if the master is below that, you're not getting the real sound. If the channel volume is lower than probably noon, you're just not getting the real sound of the amp. So I think a lot of guys buy these and, you know, it's a 100-watt amp. It's made for touring and playing live, and they're trying to play it at bedroom levels, and it just doesn't sound the same. You know, it's one of those that you truly have to crank it up to get the real sound of the amp. I should also mention this is a 2005, so I've also owned a 2019 and I was able to compare them, and they do sound really similar, but the 2019, the newer versions, are a little bit higher gain, a little bit brighter sounding. So these are a little bit darker, which for me, personal preference, I like this one better. Right, moving right along, we've got the orange Dual Dark 100 up here. I had a Dual Dark 50 for the longest time. It was one of my main amps. Actually, I still have it. It's over here. And I have it listed for sale too, so if anybody's interested, shoot me a message. But once I had the opportunity to get the 100-watt version, I said, you know, what the hell, you might as well have the 100. So honestly, I can't really hear much difference. I guess this one has more headroom. The tone is pretty much exactly the same to my ears, but I love these things. It's got this huge, crazy low end, super high gain. But you can also take channel A and roll it back and like clean it up real nice, and then you can use fuzz pedals with it. It's very good in that regard as well. So that's the Dual Dark 100. That brings us to probably my favorite metal amp ever. This is the Bogner Ubershaw Rev One. So this is one of the first 170 of these ever made. This particular one is number 154. And I've actually owned two of these. I had number 85 also. Recently sold that one to a buddy of mine because it sounded exactly the same as this one, and you know, you don't really need two of the same amp, at least not in my situation, you don't. So this is a one-trick pony of an amp. It has this kind of low growly mid thing that it does, and it's just super heavy, especially if you put a boost on it. Super high gain. You can see these are some of the settings that I use here. Actually, this is, I'll show you the setting that I use most of the time. You can crank the presence up or not. And it's one of those amps that you definitely need to EQ it with your ears and not with your eyes, because like I said, it's all about the mids and the way that the mids come in, like the way that the presence interacts with the treble and the mid knob. It's kind of weird if you're just looking at it. You'd be like, oh, you know, I shouldn't have the presence on 10, but hey, when, you know, you just got to use your ears with these things sometimes. And you'll also notice I have channel 1 all on 0. I don't use channel 1. I've never even turned it on. From everything I've read, everything I've heard, it pretty much sucks. But channel 2, that's where it's at, man. So I figured I'd show you the backside here. You know, I was talking about tube rolling earlier, so I went with the Mesa EL34 power tubes on this. I find the Mesa tubes have a little bit more gain. They're a little bit grittier sounding, which for this amp is perfect. And then I did a mix of, an eclectic mix, we'll say, of preamp tubes. So let's see, that's a Gold Lion, got a vintage PM tube. I think those are Mesa 12AX7s. This one looks like a Mullard. You know, I spend a lot of time rolling tubes in my amps just because I am kind of an audiophile, gearhead, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure a lot of you watching also are. So I'm here to tell you, if you have the time and you have extra tubes laying around, it's worth trying to do it, to dial in those, you know, subtle little changes that probably nobody but us would notice, but I notice it, and it makes the playing experience more enjoyable for me if I know, you know, I've got it sounding the best it can sound. Here again, just while I'm back here, I put KT77, these are the Gold Lion Genelex brand, and the Diesel VH4 as well. And then, you know, there's I can't quite get the camera in there, but there's another mix of, I think those are all different branded 12AX7s. I almost forgot this one because I'm about to take it into the shop. It needs a little bit of work. It's been overheating, but this is an Ampec Vl 1002, I think it's called. So this was developed by Lee Jackson back in the 90s, and it's a killer amp. It's based on a JCM 800 circuit, I think, but they had some quality control issues with, like, mainly an overheating issue. So it's something you can get fixed for like $100, but I just got to find the time to get into the shop and get this thing back in working order. So over here we've got a few interesting ones. This is another clone amp, which I say I don't do these often, but apparently I do. So this one was built by Brittone as well, and it's not a real train wreck, but supposedly Ken Fisher did actually work on this amp. I have no proof of that. No one's ever been able to provide proof. What I can tell you is it sounds different than any amp I've ever heard. It's totally made for rock and roll. It's super loud, and it's the kind of thing, if you crank it up and do the Pete Townsend, you know, like big chord thing, it just sounds like an explosion. So I could believe he worked on it, but you know, I didn't pay any extra for that name, believe me. Moving right along, excuse my desk here, but we've got a Sun Solaris. This is a 1969. Another great amp for doom. You know, if you keep it cleaned up, you can do the fuzz pedal thing with it pretty well. If you crank the volume up, it gets a lot of dirt and you can get a nice bluesy tone. And then again, I got my dual dark 50 watt down here. Right, and so that brings us to my Mesa Boogie. This is a JP2C Plus. So this is basically, you know, it's the John Petrucci signature, but it's basically a 2C Plus reissue. And I've never been a huge Mesa Boogie guy. I mean, I appreciate them, I like them, but there's something about like all the EQ options is just a little bit too much for me. It's like they're too complicated to dial in. So that I've always found annoying, but I will say once you dial them in, they sound incredible. So you know, if you're going to get one Mesa, this is probably the one to have. All right, and then below the Mesa, we've got this guy. So this is the Vht Deliverance 120. I love this amp. This is kind of a sleeper amp, and I feel like they don't get as much credit as they should, but for under 2,000 bucks in current market price, these are just absolutely killer amps. It is a little bit of a one-trick pony, and I'll show you my settings here, but it's got a great sound for metal, especially if you boost it. And it sort of does like the stringy kind of thing that Wizard amps do, but I would say it's sort of in between a Wizard and like just a really angry Marshall. It's got a nice like kind of sizzly grind to the distortion. So great amp for metal. You know, I like to blend this one with like the Uber or the VH4, just give it a little bit more grind. Right, so moving right along, this is my Varelan. So this is a kind of a niche amp. This was built by one guy and he no longer builds them, so these are discontinued. And this is my like truly dedicated doom, sludge, stoner doom, that kind of music amp. And you know, you can crank the gain up on it and it has a great sound on its own. Probably 90% of the time though, I clean it up a little bit and then I use like, you know, a hyper fuzz or some kind of fuzz pedal in front of it, but it's just fantastic for that kind of music. Right, and last but not least, we have some rack units here. Now, I apologize for my ghetto setup. I don't have an actual rack to put these in, so I just kind of stacked them up. But this is some kind of cool stuff that I got about a week ago. So you've got a 1988 Lee Jackson GP1000 preamp, 1987 version. Then we've got a Yamaha SPX90, which is a multi-effects unit. And then we have the SP1000, which is the power amp, stereo power amp that goes with those preamps. So these things are a lot of fun. They're you know, I talk about one-trick ponies. These are definitely one-trick ponies. So they do one sound only. The EQ does practically nothing. I mean, seriously, like 10 versus 0 is the most negligible difference. Like, it just has its sound and that's what it is, but it's a good sound, especially if you boost it. So, and what's kind of cool about this one, this 1987, I took it apart and I realized it's actually one of the first 100 ever made. So it's the exact same thing that Alexi Laiho from Children of Bodom used for a long time. I think Paul Gilbert used it back in the day, Alan Holdsworth, a lot of guys use that one. It's based on a Fender circuit. The one above it, the 1988, is based on a JCM 800 circuit, and that's the one that Zakk Wylde used on No Rest for the Wicked. So this is actually the setup he used. He used this preamp, this power amp, and then he used the chorus effect from the Yamaha unit. So kind of fun stuff to play with, you know. And I will use, this is a solid state power amp, by the way, so I'll use this, but I can also run these into any of these amps that have an effects loop. So it's kind of fun, you know, combining like 1980s technology preamp with you know, for instance, like the Rev One power section with those Mesa tubes. You know, you get a little extra dirt, a little extra punch with that. So I love these things. All right, y'all, so that about does it. That is most of the gear I'm working with. I have a few other amps, but most of them are not at this property at the moment. So I'll walk you through the cabs and then we'll plug a few of these in and let you hear what they sound like. All right, we'll start off with this one. So this is actually the first 4x12 I ever had, and I still have it. 1960A Marshall, and I switched the speakers out for Creambacks and Scumbag M75s, and I put them in an X pattern. Over here, let me move that gold top out of the way. We've got a Silvano 4x12. This is just stock with the V30s. We've got a diesel rear loaded with V30s. We've got another 1960A. This one's got T75s and Creambacks in an X pattern. This one is not a Marshall. This is actually a Splon. I just didn't like their logo, so I swapped it out. But it's all stock with creambacks. Down here we've got the Friedman with, let's see, it's got V30s on the bottom row and then greenbacks up top. This is another 1960A, which has scumbacks and T75s in X pattern. And then this is one of my favorite cabs. This is a bone stock 1960B with the T75s. This was owned by a band, or by the guitar player in a band called Hallows Eve, which were, I guess they were local around here back in the 80s or 90s or something. And so it's been played out, and these speakers are super broken in. They're the best sounding T75s I've ever heard.